I'm Mik Garris, and this is Postmortem. Our guest is Frank Darabont, an author, screenwriter, producer, director, and Oscar bait. Frank, good to have you here.
And bald guy. You forgot bald guy.
I didn't forget.
Okay. It's not good.
Now, what a lot of people don't know is that you were born in a refugee camp in France.
In France, yeah.
That your parents had escaped the Hungarian Revolution.
In '56, when the Russian tanks came in and blew the hell out of Budapest, my parents fled across the border. You know, I mean, they literally left Hungary walking, as did several 100,000 people at that time. So imagine being Austria, for example. There's suddenly 200,000 people who need food and clothing and political asylum.
An incredible story.
It is an incredible story. It's actually a story I've always wanted to tell, not specific to my parents, but specific to the event, because it's so amazing. And it really ramped up the tensions in the Cold War. It's like a little footnote in between a world war and Vietnam for us.
We've never experienced that.
We've never experienced that. And it's a great story to tell. Well, maybe one of these days I'll get to tell it.
Well, your childhood must have been completely informed by that.
Oh, completely. You live in the shadow of something like that the rest of your life. We came to the United States when I was just an infant. Came over on the boat, typical immigrants with clothes on their backs kind of story. And we spent the first 5 years of my life in Chicago. We came west when I was 5 years old. I remember it was right after Kennedy assassination, and then subsequent funeral was broadcast on television. And right after the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And then we came west, came to L.A., and been here pretty much ever since.
Now, you've always been interested in horror stories and horror films. Do you think that may have come out of that background?
I suspect not, although my grandmother was, nuts. And was, because my father's side of the family is from Transylvania. So, when I was a kid, she finally was able to emigrate, and she wound up living with us. And she totally believed in vampires and all the most crazy, stuff. So I grew up hearing that this shit was real, know. So it kind of came as a surprise to me that it's really kind of not. It's mostly imaginative,
So when you were a kid?
Fictional things. When I was a kid, look, I don't know what that background, what a background does or doesn't do to a person. All I remember is, from earliest memory, I loved the genre. When all the Universal monster movies were on that,
the shock theater package, yeah.
Exactly, and suddenly you'd get to see Dracula, a few times on the weekend, or they'd broadcast The Wolfman or whatever. And for some reason, that was just the natural inclination. Some people are born a certain way. They have green eyes. They love the genre. They love tales of the spooky or the or the imaginative. There's definitely a tradition in that among Hungarians. Hungarians are very fanciful people. George Pal was Hungarian, and obviously some of his stuff influenced us.
Absolutely, there's no question.
Growing up.
When you were a kid, were you an outsider?
Oh, completely an outsider. I was a complete nerd.
This is so common within the genre.
I think it's common within the arts, period. Yeah. Most Broadway dancers are gay. You can't tell me they weren't outsiders in their hometowns. Outsiders tend to find what they need through the arts. And that's, I think, very common.
What is it about the darker stories that attracted you, young Frankie Darabont?
Well, it was never at the exclusion of the uplifting stories as well. I mean, I think it's
that's a mistake that people make, is think that people who work within the genre are only interested in the genre.
That's very common. They don't make it with me so much because I've made movies like Shawshank Redemption.
You've done the crossover.
I've done the thing that tries to inspire and uplift. So people actually are more surprised to hear that I love the genre so much.
Right.
They walk into my office and they look around, and there's like every corner of my office has got Terminators and aliens and
painted model kits.
Painted model kits. People walk in and they're surprised by that because they base their opinion on what I like based upon the movies, by and large, that I've made. And
Without realizing that earlier on in your career, you were strictly confined to that horror gutter that we often live in.
That's exactly right. You know, it's not a bad gutter to be in. I mean, they're all velvet cages, aren't they?
They are. Well, when did what movie first made you think, maybe this is something I want to do?
If you love this stuff, if you love what we do, you do have this vague notion of, I'd like to grow up and make movies, or I'd love to grow up and, write books. I want to tell stories. I'd love to grow up and be a storyteller. I'm sure you experienced the same kind of vague notion.
Absolutely.
But at that age, it's almost like, it's like the vague notion of, I'd like to grow up and be a strong man in a circus.
Yeah. You can't imagine you'd really do this.
That you'd really do this. But there's got to be one flashpoint event where the match got dropped and the fire started to go. And for me, that was seeing THX 1138 when I was 12. And it blew my mind in a lot of ways, but I felt the first time really I felt the imprimatur of the filmmaker. At 12 years old, I'm watching this movie, and I suddenly had this sort of epiphany. Whoever's making this is standing just off the edge of the screen, and I can't see him. That somebody's also sharing a very unique world view with me. It ain't just to entertain me, but it's also sharing something on a deeper level. I think it's probably the same feeling the Scorsese's had, or his generation had when they first started seeing the Italian neorealist films or the French New Wave stuff.
You're getting a personal vision here.
It's not just singing and dancing and howling monkeys, and there's something more going on here. There's something very, very, very cool going on here. I wish I could recommend that, the folks listening watch that movie. That so inspired me, but George has revamped it. The version of the movie that's out on DVD. Oh,
that's right, on DVD. It's been reworked digitally and like.
Oy. And I'm even on the supplemental stuff. They said, would you like to do this? I said, yeah, of course. I'm the biggest cheerleader for this film. I walked out of the movie theater at the age of 12 wanting to do this for a living because of that movie.
Yeah.
And anyway, that was a huge inspiration for me. But then so have so many other things been. Every Kubrick movie I ever saw we're of that generation, right? Mm-hmm. Where Stanley Kubrick was like, the thing. You couldn't say Kubrick without a crash of thunder and lightning accompanying
from on high.
From on high.